Welcome. I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and this is Minutes of Inspiration. I pray that everything is going well with you. Again, we are in one of the newly reformatted sets where we have begun to videotape, and hopefully we'll bring many more things to you. Again, this is Minutes of Inspiration. I want to get right into our scripture, and I want to start with Genesis chapter 22, verses 11. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. Now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said, To this day in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. I want to come straight from verse 14, because this entire passage brings us to the point in time in which we are today. As you remember, most will, and some, maybe this is new to you, but the scripture says that God speaks to Abraham and tells him, Now offer up your only son to me. He was the son of promise, but he was not the only son of Abraham, but he was the dear son of Abram and his wife Sarai, who, later became Sarah. He, believing and not staggering at the promise, and we can only wonder what was going through the mind of Abraham, but we do realize that when he comes to Mount Moriah, the scripture says that as he takes the boy and carries the wood, his servant said, So, is there anything that we need to do, so to speak? And he said, No, I and the lad will return. And so we see the faith of Abraham. And the faith of Abraham was not in his own abilities, but his faith was in Jehovah, or Jehovah. Some say Yahweh. And so when we look at this text, he gets all the way up there into the mountain where God has commanded him. And his son, Isaac, asks him, Where is the sacrifice? And he speaks and said, The Lord shall provide himself a sacrifice. This can be taken two ways. If we consider it, one is the Lord will provide a sacrifice for himself, or the Lord will give himself as a sacrifice. And I've heard many commentators speak from both perspectives. But we do understand that God was going to provide a sacrifice, and yet, spiritually and prophetically, he was going to provide Emmanuel as a sacrifice, God with us. And so he gets him up, and it's remarkable that his son, who could have more than likely gotten away if he chose to, but he submitted to being tied up, being placed on this altar, and he was literally submitting to death. And here he is a type of Jesus who submits, who renders himself and gives himself up for the many. And this is very important. We cannot sacrifice and do anything that is acceptable unto God to get rid of sin. Jesus paid it all. And so as we look here, Abram now picks up the knife. He's ready to plunge it into the very heart of his son, and the angel stops him. And the angel says, Now I know. You've gone to the point where you have revealed in your heart of hearts that you will withhold no good thing from me. I think we've come to a point in the church where we forget that we belong to God, and we forget that He's the one that should be pleased. He will take care of us, and He will do those things that are needful for us. But we serve a true and living God. And as we look at this text, then the scripture says, and there caught in the thicket was the ram. And so Abraham offers up the ram, and here he names the place Jehovah Jireh. Many have interpreted this, Jehovah Jireh, as meaning the Lord sees. In the book of, in Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, you see Jehovah Jireh, and it means Jehovah sees, but it doesn't mean sees just for the point of looking. In other words, it means He sees, He understands, He knows what you need, and He is a provider because He sees the very need. And so this becomes a very special place where God provides a ram for the sacrifice to be lifted up for the price and the substitution of all mankind to be made through Jesus Christ. And so Jehovah Jireh, or Jehovah Jireh, many say my provider, but it literally means God sees and understands, and because He sees, He's moved to provide all that is necessary, all that is needed, and in many cases, those things that are desired, if those desires are in accordance to the will of God. And so Jehovah Jireh, my provider who sees, my provider who moves for me, who's ready to bring me through, who's ready to cause me to be sustained in a time of hardship. Only God knows our time of departure. For the scripture says it is appointed unto men once to die, and then the judgment. Even as some depart, and I know this is going to be a hard thing to say, but God knows the hour, God knows the day and the time, and God knows when we shall leave this earth. It's not necessarily that God makes people die and God takes them out. It is appointed unto men once to die. But our God, Jehovah Jireh, He sees, He knows. We don't understand the inner workings of death. We don't understand the inner workings of this time. But God knows. I pray that you're safe. I pray that your family is safe. And I pray that you conduct yourself in wisdom. Remember, faith is not believing what you desire, but the scripture says faith towards God. It is what God has spoken that we muster our faith to believe. And at this time, we have to really get close to God. I thank you for joining me. God bless you. And until next time, I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and this is Minutes of Inspiration.